Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of infertility struggles, pregnancy loss and miscarriage, postpartum depression and anxiety, mental health struggles, body image changes, and breastfeeding challenges. Our goal is to share real life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everyone, to Radiant Resilience. I have a returning guest today, my dear friend, Cookie G. Larson. Cookie is here for a second time today. We are going to change up the topic a little bit. If you haven't listened yet, go back and listen to episode 25. She came on here and talked about her getting her citizenship here in the US. So it's a very fascinating story. So definitely go back and listen to episode 25 if you haven't already and learn more about Cookie. But today we are going to talk about a topic that I think a lot of women struggle with, but is not as widely talked about. I think it's getting better, but postpartum depression is going to be our topic for today. So welcome, Cookie. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. I'm excited about this topic too. We touched on it, I think. I don't know if it was like pre-recording the last episode, but we touched about it a little bit. And we thought we would do another episode talking about that because I just think it's so important. I know we have a lot of infertility listeners of my podcast, but I also think we have a lot of listeners of women who have had kids and have probably experienced this or struggled with it. And again, I think it's becoming more talked about, but still, I think a lot of women don't even know
I think
sometimes
it's a little
that they
taboo
have it.
still.
Yeah.
I think it's a little taboo because I know like postpartum depression is also what we're going to be talking about today, or postpartum in general, because I'll touch on that later, but there's definitely a whole slew of things that go into it. I don't know if I like would categorize everything into just postpartum, even depression.
Okay.
So because there's so many different avenues of this, and I feel like sometimes you can corner yourself with the word depression.
Mm,
And so I just feel like maybe as a general whole, postpartum in general would be just like the
yeah.
umbrella category over it. And depression is definitely a big factor into that. And I do think it is still taboo. I don't think people talk about it enough, but there's just like a lot of factors into that. But I don't know if you want me to start from like when I was pregnant, because let me tell you, I know you have gone through a ton of stuff too, which I can't imagine all the stuff you've gone through, first off, or anybody else that you've actually had on your podcast that I've listened to episodes from, because you guys have definitely put your body
Yeah.
through the ringer.
Yeah.
And luckily, I haven't had to do that aspect of things.
Mhm.
But mostly this kind of started. So when we were obviously the same as everybody else who's trying to family plan. We were
Yeah.
excited, let's get started. And it's all new and exciting because you're about to get ready to enter your next chapter in your life. But what I actually didn't realize in the beginning was I didn't realize how hard it would be to get pregnant either in the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah.
And I've experienced both sides of it where it was really hard to get pregnant and then really easy to get pregnant back.
Yeah.
And so I've experienced both ends of the spectrum. And so with me and my husband, we really did try for about a year. And with our age, because everybody is older, then you're getting all the recommendations from your doctor that you're going to have to start looking into getting tested for infertility.
And
So I
isn't
was like,
it interesting though that in high school, I get it. We don't want teenage pregnancies.
oh, yeah,
However, they make it sound like if you kiss a boy, you're going to get pregnant. And it's just the
right.
easiest thing in the world. And It
And it could be.
actually, it can be, of course. My sister is one of those. Both of her children were like one tries. My nephew
Right.
was an oops when she was 19. So it definitely can be, but I feel like especially nowadays, more and more women are struggling, or couples are struggling
I
with it.
agree.
And I know there's a lot of doctors out there, and I'm sorry, this is a quick little tangent, but there are a lot of doctors out there pushing for preconception testing before you even start trying, like in your 20s and
Yes.
stuff like that. And I think that's brilliant because I mean, we're just told we can get pregnant in 5 seconds. And I guess, when you are younger, like you're talking about,
You're
age
more
definitely
fertile.
makes a difference. And we're all waiting till our 30s now to have kids. So that
Or
makes a
close to your
difference
40s
too.
to have
Yeah.
children.
Or
And
in your 40s. Yeah.
in your 40s, our generation, generations wise, it has definitely changed
Yeah.
decades. And when we have kids, because obviously when our parents are probably having children, they were probably in their early 20s. And
Yeah. My
you know,
mom had me at 23.
yeah, it's very normal. And to be completely honest, if I had to have a baby at 23, I'm not sure what I would have done because my life was crazy at
Oh, I
23.
know. I know. I was definitely not ready. And even my sister, who had my nephew at 19, like, so hard. It was so
Right.
hard. She is amazing, and I will forever applaud her for all of the work that she did, because she did end up going on to get her master's and all this stuff.
Crazy.
But yeah, a teen mom, yeah, it's a huge life-changing thing, and you haven't even lived life at that point,
Exactly,
right?
exactly. And I always knew that I wanted to have fun in my 20s. And then me and my husband got married. I think I was like 32
Mhm.
or 30 or something like that. I forget. In 2019. And then I always thought I want to enjoy spending time with my husband
Yeah.
first, and then we can plan to have a baby
Yeah.
after that. But there's different aspects to this because we tried for a year.
Mhm.
And the first few months, the first 6 months, you're just like, okay, well, it
Okay,
didn't
we'll try
happen.
again
Okay, we
next
tried
month.
again
Yeah.
next month. Yeah. But there was definitely a point where we talk about postpartum depression, but there was definitely a point where this was weighing down heavily towards when you get close to that 1 year mark. And I remember one time, even me and my husband were actually going to a friend of ours' birthday party, and we were in the car. And obviously, I had just found out again that I wasn't pregnant again after
Oh.
trying. And I know that pain.
Mhm.
And I remember being in the car, and me and my husband were talking, and it'll be okay. And he's, what's wrong? And like, he's trying to be really supportive because what else are you going to do except try? And you can do the best that you can by tracking ovulation, doing everything scientifically that you
Yeah.
know of to make sure that you hit it on the right time. And my husband was being super supportive, but then I literally lost it in the
Mm.
car.
I've had more than those moments.
Yes.
Like my poor husband.
I,
I don't know
I
what to do
know
with
you
you now.
understand. I know
Yeah.
you understand this. Like,
Yeah, no.
but it's like getting another gut punch again, another month.
Yeah.
Oh, we're not
Yeah.
pregnant again. And I'm very fortunate in the fact that like we really only tried for a total of a year
Mhm.
from start to finish. And I know obviously there's so many people out there that my hearts go out to them because they try for years.
But once you make that decision to do it
Right.
and to start a family, then you start envisioning what your life is going to look like with kids and what your future is going to look like. And you get so excited to share this with your partner. And then every month that's a failure. People say that to me all the time. They're like, oh, I haven't been through what you've been through or whatever. And I understand that. But I think that anybody that has tried for any length of time like that, and I consider a year, that's a long time. That's a lot
Right.
of cycles that your body went through, that you were disappointed every single month. And I actually had a friend who called me really upset one time because she was trying and it didn't work. And she called me and she had lost her parents. And she was like, this is worse than losing my parents, the grief in that and just the constant failure, because it's also our bodies that we're
Right.
relying on to do what they're supposed to be doing.
And
So,
mind you, I didn't do like the shots and I didn't
but
that stuff.
but it's still like
It's
you were tracking, you were paying attention,
I
you were,
was
you
so
know.
diligent. Like I need data. I was a data. You should have seen my notebook. Like I was a data person.
The apps of all the
And
tracking
and
and
I think too, there was one point where obviously I had that emotional breakdown in the car with my husband, and he's like, "You okay?" And I literally lost it because I'm like, "Why isn't it working?" And blah blah blah. I just was like bawling, and I was like, I'm doing everything right on my end. When I'm
Yeah.
working out, I'm taking vitamins, I'm doing everything right. I'm eating healthy. I'm not drinking. I'm not like all of that kind of stuff. And I'm an A student, so that was not A for effort.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I was like, it's such a different experience because I've had that first part of it where it took so long for us to get pregnant. And mind you, a year in the scheme of my life is not very long.
But it is a long time when you're trying.
When you're
It
trying, because
feels like
you have to
forever.
wait like
Yeah.
a week, then 2 weeks, then you have to wait another 2 weeks, and
Yeah.
then it doesn't happen again, and then the cycle starts over again. And I've been through that aspect of it, and that part of it I feel like was also very. I went through some. I wouldn't say I was depressed during that time, but definitely there was some emotional factors. I was definitely more sad during that
Mhm.
period than,
Yeah.
and it was. You're right. It's a constant. Once that month hits, and then you know that it's negative, you got to take a moment for yourself and
Yeah.
regroup every
And it's
single
such
month.
a roller coaster, right? Because,
Oh, yeah,
okay, you got your period, you're horribly upset and
right,
angry at the world, but then you're like, okay, pull it together. We've got
right,
another month to try in a week or
right,
two. So then you get all excited, your hope gets up again. Then you go through those 2 weeks where you're waiting after ovulation and you're
right.
like, hey, maybe this is the time. And you're overanalyzing everything in your body. And then all of a sudden, you get your period again. So
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
literally like this
That
every fucking
roller
month.
coaster is the right word. 100%. A roller coaster is the right word because even trying to get pregnant, there was some factors where, and I know you have gone through this and other people with infertility where it's emotional roller coaster for you, but it tests your marriage. It tests your
Yes.
marriage. And my husband and I, honestly, we always joke because like we have really never really fought prior to trying to have kids. I think maybe we had one fight on our in our entire like dating to getting married phase. Like we communicate very well, but I think there was like one time where we were very stressed. It was like the same year where we're planning a wedding, we were getting a rental
Yeah.
ready and re-renovating, buying a house. Like it was like all in a matter of 4 months, we were very stressed. And I think that was like the only time I can look back and be like, oh yeah, we definitely yelled at each other.
Yeah.
And then luckily, like going through trying to have a baby, although I didn't have depression, I will tell you that there, again, there was like factors in it every single month that I had a hard time with. And emotionally, it was really draining for me during that time. And my
Being
husband,
pregnant, you mean? Or,
you know, like trying.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then my husband was incredibly supportive because
Mhm.
me and him always talked about if it didn't happen. And luckily, we were like I said, we have a very open line of communication where we talked about we would not go through crazy measures to extraordinary measures to have a baby. If
Mhm.
we tried and it didn't happen by a certain age, we had discussed that, all right, we'll just be happy together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was part of our family
Yeah.
discussion, like planning discussion. And that is
Yeah.
not the same as other people. And, but then it was crazy because I went through some crazy, nothing is crazier than your hormones. Go trying to get pregnant, getting pregnant, and then having a baby.
Hi, friend, and welcome to this episode of Radiant Resilience. We are always looking for new guests on the podcast. I want to highlight you if you have a story of resilience that inspires others. Everyone has a story, and I believe that sharing yours can help others feel less alone. Are you ready to share your journey and inspire others? I want to hear from you. Every story has the power to impact lives and foster a supportive community. If you have a tale of overcoming adversity, personal growth, or a unique perspective on life's challenges, I would love to have you as a guest on the podcast. To become a guest, please email us directly at radiantresiliencepodcast@gmail.com or click the link in the show notes to become a guest. Join us in spreading hope, strength, and inspiration one story at a time. Be brave and share your story so others feel less alone. I hope to see you soon. Yeah. Yeah. I've said several times now because being in the infertility world too, I've seen some just absolutely awful things with stillborns and stuff too. And so I've said like recently, I'm like, anybody who can get pregnant, stay pregnant, and go all the way to the end and have a healthy baby, that seems something that is more rare than it should be.
And if you look at the scientific version of all of the inside of all of this, it is 1 million things have to go right
Yeah.
in order for that to happen.
Yeah.
So, in my head, I thought it would always just be easy, and then it wasn't. And then we had that emotion. I had an emotional breakdown in that car that
Mm.
day. And I'm talking like, have you ever ugly cried so hard that you can't speak? You're like, like
Yep.
one of those moments in the car. And
Snots
we're
everywhere.
sitting in the parking lot right before we're supposed to go into
Oh,
a birthday party and had
oh,
this
that's
emotional breakdown. And I know other people know what this feels like. That was also the hardest part, is because I really felt for a while there, I had to like really pull myself together mentally every month when we were actually trying. So that actually is where it started. And then we were very lucky and fortunate. And then we got pregnant. But what was crazy was then I went and we had an early miscarriage at 7 weeks. And
oh,
it was so sad because we were so excited to tell people. And
yeah.
we only told three groups of people, my best friends, like his best friends, and then just a real close knit, like family best friends, and then like my parents.
Mhm.
And literally, like, I remember I told my mom, and 3 days later, I was already like having a miscarriage. And it was like the saddest thing ever because the grandparents are also excited and everyone's just super excited. And then that happened. And it's because I had bleeding. And then everyone's like, don't freak out. It's sometimes common.
You're not
Yeah.
supposed to
How are
freak
you
out.
not freaking out? And that's also why I wasn't announcing it on social media until we were at least into the second trimester, that safe zone. And so I'm glad I didn't tell more people. It was just like a handful of people, just our close people that we told. And then we went through a miscarriage. And then what was crazy is um, you get medication to try to pass it on your own. And I was really lucky in that fact that my body responded and did what it was supposed to do. So I didn't have to get like a DNC because I,
Mhm.
honestly, looking back at it now, because I had such a hard time with the miscarriage, I'm not sure I mentally I could have even gone through a DNC. I would have probably been more of a wreck than I
Yeah.
already was. And I remember just I did like didn't come out of my room for the whole week when we went through the miscarriage. It was my hormones were crazy afterward. There was constant crying, there was constant anxiety, there was so much feelings and emotions. And again, husband was so supportive. And I think that was probably the most raw in our entire relationship that he's ever seen me was like the
Mm.
day that I knew I for sure finished passing my pregnancy, early pregnancy, and I came downstairs and I looked at him dead in the eyes. And then I just started bawling with no words.
Mm.
And I looked like a zombie because I wasn't
Yeah.
showering. I just been in my room for
Well,
a week.
and
Like,
let's talk about the fact
mm,
that if your hormones were stable at that point, it would have been an awful thing to be going through.
right,
And then
right,
you add on top of it the hormonal mess that we are.
right. Like
I like it makes it 10 times worse than it
the hormones were
is.
crazy. I
Mhm.
had never felt anything so
Mhm.
insane before in my life until I went through the miscarriage because we're on such a high, then such a low, then and it hit even harder than just trying and finding out you weren't pregnant.
Yeah.
Because you're right, like then once you are pregnant, then you have other things that you are thinking of for the future. It's not
Yeah.
just like trying anymore. It's once you're pregnant, now you're like you're already thinking about baby names, you're already thinking about things like
Because
that.
your
And then
life is about to
mm,
drastically change.
and so that was really difficult. And then I've been always very independent and very strong. So when I was going through that really hard time emotionally, and I will always reiterate this, I have a very supportive husband through all of this. And I always joke, I'm like, I don't know how you didn't leave me through all of this because
Hmm.
I was a totally different human being during this
Yeah.
time. And so I brushed it off because in my entire life, I'm 100% about making sure your mental health is healthy. You are keeping yourself in check. You are going in for checks. If you need help, I have no problem. Please seek help. I am definitely an advocate for mental health,
Yeah.
but I personally had never experienced it
Mhm.
where I thought I would ever even need help or talk to anybody. Or I'm very strong and independent in the fact that when I go through anything, I will just deal with it on my own and then I will figure it out, is how my mentality is all the time. And then to go through this, and it was really hard. And what was crazy was just going through that like simple, and I'm going to say my miscarriage was much more simple than other people's, obviously further along,
Yeah.
because those obviously break my heart, and all miscarriages break my heart. But I was very fortunate, and me and my husband talk about this, that if we were going to have a miscarriage, I'm glad that it happened in the stage that I was in, um, for my body to process that and pass it. And it was just early on. So it wasn't like a full on baby either. I am grateful in that manner that even if it happened during that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm the strong, independent person that's trying to get through this. And what I found was during the miscarriage time, and of course, you're on the phone, you're Googling, and
Yeah.
so I honestly, I cannot believe how many things I have read of statistics and,
Mhm.
all that stuff. And really, that was also my own therapy in a sense to know that like you are not alone.
Yeah.
But in turn, you're right. Even if it happens, because 1 in 4 pregnancies end in a miscarriage, and it could be a chemical miscarriage, or it could be like a chemical pregnancy, or it could be something further down along. But 1 in 4
Yeah.
pregnancies, and some people don't even know that they're pregnant.
Yeah.
And like luckily we would because we would be tracking it religiously,
Yeah.
stuff like that, unless you really weren't paying attention. But yeah, so that was actually my first like hormonal roller coaster of like
Mhm.
highs and lows, and especially after your body passes it, even if it was early on, like my hormones were just so crazy. I could probably just cry. Like I
Mm.
would see something and just cry. And I'm not even just talking while I was going through it. It could have just been like 2 weeks later, whatever. And I'm very fortunate in the fact that I had the other side of things where I couldn't get pregnant in the beginning. I don't know if it's my body just had to learn how to do it. Who knows?
Yeah, they've said that before too. I've heard that once you've done it, that's why they say sometimes it takes forever to get pregnant with the first, and then
Right.
sometimes the second one is boom because your body's now done it. And so I don't know what the science is behind that, but I have heard
I
that. So
I don't know either. And that's exactly what happened to us. I had the miscarriage, and literally the month after, and mind you, we were not trying after the miscarriage because my husband and I discussed that we're going to take a break
yeah,
after the miscarriage. I just needed
yep,
to mentally just get back to my own happy. And of course, we weren't trying. And we literally got pregnant the next cycle.
wow,
And then I was terrified. Talk
yeah,
about,
because
we
you
talk,
had the
right.
miscarriage.
And we talk about depression. So I wasn't like depressed or anything during this time, but more so, we talked about anxiety. How
Hmm.
much severe anxiety I had was unreal. I'm already a pretty type A anxious person. It's crazy. But I had never felt anything of this magnitude with
Mm.
being anxious was with when I got pregnant with Breck. And I found out I was pregnant because all those same feelings that you get when you were pregnant the first time, I was like, ooh, I'm feeling all these weird things again. That's weird. Like, then I took a pregnancy test and it was positive, and then it was crazy. You would think I would have been so excited. Oh, like I'm pregnant. No, instead it was like I'm pregnant. Although joyous occasion, I was super anxious. Like the
Yeah,
minute I found out I was pregnant, I had been anxious till pretty much the day I gave birth.
yeah, yeah. I've heard that a lot,
Yeah.
and movies, I feel like
Mm.
I blame Hollywood for this, making it look like it's always this the girl telling the guy, we're pregnant. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always this joyous thing, and no one ever shows the journey through pregnancy and how scary it can be because stuff can, even if you didn't experience a miscarriage, stuff can creep up at any point in time.
Right.
My niece actually has a hole in her heart. And there was one point in the pregnancy where my sister was like, she's not moving very much. And she ended up getting a heart monitor to double check that
A
the
fetal
baby's,
Doppler just all the time.
yeah, all
Yeah.
the time, just for her own sanity, because she knew that the baby had a bit of a heart issue and then beforehand and before giving birth. And then every once in a while, if she wouldn't move for a while, she's like, okay, I need to make sure that this is
And
okay.
that's a real thing. I actually
So,
borrowed a fetal Doppler from one of my really close friends.
mhm.
They brought it all the way up here from Colorado Springs, and I used that thing religiously for a while, but then I had to actually stop myself because I was like, okay, you're letting this kind of run your life because you're
Yeah.
worried all the time. And my husband always say, if you're worried, that's not doing anything good for you or the baby because you're
No, but that's
stressed all the
so
time.
hard.
Yes. And so much harder said than done,
Yeah.
obviously. And so it was crazy because I got pregnant with Breck literally the month after. So then I didn't even have time to grasp, I'm going to try again. That was a shocker because I just didn't even think it was going to happen because
Yeah.
of the hard time in the front end. Then it was like my emotions were crazy because I didn't know how to feel. And every single day and early on in that pregnancy, I was like checking all the time. I was so terrified. Are my symptoms still there? I was like,
Well, especially because in the beginning you don't go to the doctor very often, right? So
you
you
don't go for a while after you get pregnant, like 8 to 10 weeks or something, unless you've had issues prior, like you don't go until you're like 8 to 10 weeks.
yeah,
And they don't even see you. Like
yeah.
my OB won't even schedule you unless
And that's the
you
only
are,
way you can know if everything's okay.
and especially when it's so early, like a
Early,
fetal
yeah.
Doppler that like you get at home, like it doesn't pick it up like a heartbeat or anything like that. You have to wait until you're a few more weeks pregnant for
Yeah.
that to even pick up things like that. And so it was just crazy because I actually wasn't emotionally ready to
Hmm.
be okay with being pregnant yet. And then we got pregnant. And then that was a whole nother roller coaster because your hormones in that first trimester is already crazy. And like on top of your hormones being crazy, I was as sick as a dog with
Hmm.
Breck. I was so jealous of all my other friends who had babies and they were, oh my God, I love being pregnant. Or
Did you have a lot of those? Because I don't feel like I've met a lot of those women.
like my two best friends that have my two closest girlfriends that have had babies, literally they had no issues. Like they're just like, oh, fine, it's fine. It's a little uncomfortable. It's whatever. And then obviously, because no one's comfortable when you're huge, you're just uncomfortable in your own skin. Just they're just no, I feel fine. Oh, I might have a little bit of cramping or a little pain because it's heavy or whatever. And mind you, other people have had worse pregnancies than me. So I can't say that mine was like the worst by any means, but mine was, I knew I was pregnant because I was crazy sick. I would just feel like I'd be keeled over the toilet or something without throwing up, just dry heaving all the time. And trying to keep it from work was actually the hardest part during
Oh.
that was because of how sick I actually was. Like everything made me sick. Like I love coffee,
Mhm.
but during that time, the smell of any sort of coffee would have me running to the trash can to
Oh
go throw up.
man.
So I would be driving on the road early on at 6, 7 weeks pregnant, and have my vents open and the air is just going, but there's passing a Starbucks and I will smell coffee through my vents and I'd be in the car
Oh
heaving in the car. Like
no.
I had a really bad pregnancy
Mm.
in that factor. And I had so much pain as I was getting into second trimester, as the baby was like growing and stuff. I had so much pain. I forget what they call it, but it's just because like all your muscles are stretching and I was like, I remember like for somebody who's as active as I am, and in my head, I thought going into pregnancy, I was going to be like this crazy. You see the people on Instagram that I was going to be like this crazy fit person, lifting weights, running like with a big old belly. That did not happen at all. I almost didn't work out almost my entire pregnancy.
My Colin's got a roommate from college. We haven't spoken to them in years just because of life. But I saw when she was pregnant with her first one, this was years ago, they were super into CrossFit. And I saw a picture of her like 8 or 9 months pregnant doing pull-ups. And it
I
was this
can't
whole
even do a pull up.
caption. I can't do a pull-up either, but it was this whole caption of they tell you when you're pregnant not to do these things, but blah, blah. And I was just like, whoa.
Yeah. And if
Like,
your
not
body's used
everybody
to it,
can do that.
obviously you are more inclined to be able to do those things. So I always thought because I was a personal trainer that I was gonna, and I've always been in shape, that was gonna be me. That was opposite. I was sick as a dog and I couldn't do anything because of the pain. I was wearing belly bands like
Yeah.
early on in my pregnancy, and I wasn't even showing. Like my husband can attest with Breck. I probably didn't really even look like I was pregnant till I was like almost 34 weeks or
Oh,
32 or
wow.
34 weeks. And then Brett came early at 36. Like literally, I just started
Oh,
looking pregnant and then I had a baby. Like,
wow.
so it was just insane because then on top of my hormones being crazy, because I could tell you that first trimester, I felt like I was literally crazy for a while there. Um, and then after that, like going through, and what's crazy was even on the first trimester with Breck, you talk about depression and anxiety. Not only was my anxiety through the roof, but that first, I think it was like week 7 or week 8, right around the same time as my first miscarriage, I started bleeding again.
Oh,
And
no.
it threw me like I
Well,
lost.
yeah.
I remember I was in the bathroom, like
Mm.
sobbing with my husband on speakerphone because he was on a business trip. And we didn't have our doctor's appointment scheduled till like between 8 and 10 weeks, like the normal, your first doctor checkup. And so I think it was like before that. So it was like 7 weeks or something. And I was panicky. I'm talking like sobbing on the bathroom floor
Mm.
because I was like, it's happening again. It's happening again. And
I
then the
mean, when you
doctor,
start bleeding while you're pregnant, what else are you supposed to
like,
think?
that's not supposed to happen. And I know there's sometimes spotting and normal things that happen. They call it like implantation spotting or something like that. I don't know. And
Yeah.
so you read so much stuff on the
Yeah.
internet. Like that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. Google is sometimes is like your best friend, but also not your best friend when you're
Yeah.
going through a hard time because you go through a rabbit hole. And I would during that time when I was really you know, in my own head and emotional and probably in some kind of form of depression going through the first miscarriage. Like I would be up till 5 in the morning, just like on my phone, reading things nonstop, like not sleeping. So part of it's like insomnia and stuff like that because you're so stressed out.
Yeah.
And when I started bleeding, I remember my husband was out of town. Like I was sobbing and he's called the doctor, see what you can do. And he's very the more like reasonable person, like,
So is
hey, let's
mine.
yeah, let's take it like one step at a time. Like nothing, don't freak out yet. You don't know anything. Like there's nothing solidified yet. So he's like my voice of reason 99% of the time because my anxiety half the time is just I like freak out
Yeah.
immediately because I go to worst case scenario. And so that also just those 2 months was so difficult between like miscarriage, 2 to 3 months, miscarriage, pregnancy, and then thinking I was going through it again. And luckily, I wasn't having a miscarriage because I had my daughter. But I always thought it was going to be this amazing, crazy, good, amazing feeling pregnancy. And then what's nuts was you have all these things in mind, not only pregnancy, but post, like after you have a baby, of what your life is going to be. And mind you, part of it too is your body changes
Mhm.
and during pregnancy. And I had a really hard time with how my body image. I've never been a person to just always be like, oh, I need to look like a model or I need to do XYZ. I was never that person, but I keep myself in check. I was always been in shape and a personal trainer. So I always weigh myself. I weigh myself just about the same time every single day just to keep myself in check. And if I feeling a little fluffier, I make it a point to work out extra. So yeah, just like normal, that's just how I've always been. But I've never been crazy where I've had an eating disorder or anything. But the body, I call it almost like PTSD because how my body changed. And it didn't even really happen how I felt about my body until after I had the baby because your
Interesting.
body is so wrecked during during delivery and things like
Mhm.
that. Um, and you get to look at your body after you've had a baby and also all the changes in your body after it's all these new changes that you're going through.
Yeah.
And during pregnancy alone, my body was changing in the fact not only just getting bigger, but weird things were happening too. Your skin changes. I started getting varicose veins.
Mm.
Crazy. That's not even like something that my mom has or genetically, but like my veins started like popping out all crazy
Mm.
and getting darker. And luckily it subsided after I had a baby, but I still have it. Like it doesn't, uh, some of it doesn't go away. Some of it just
Yeah.
looks after it subsided a little bit. That's just how it's going to look for the rest of my life. It's crazy. Everything changes your hair, nails. Like when you're pregnant, oh, you have like beautiful hair
Mhm.
because all the stuff from the baby. And then as soon as you have a baby, part of like my postpartum journey with my anxiety and the depression era was my own body like changing so much. And you're not used to it because you don't recognize it. Like
Mhm.
I know what my body looked like for 30 something years. And then after having a baby,
Yeah.
even my anatomy, I'm talking like everything from your boobs to like down there, like everything changed. When you get this baby out of you, it wrecks you. No matter if you've had it like a vaginal delivery or if you've had a C-section, it really does. Your body goes through so much. And that was also part of one of the things that contributed to like how my mental state was at the time. It added to that factor of it. And I think, like I told you, me and my husband always have had a really good relationship. We didn't really fight until nothing tested our marriage besides trying. And then everything you think is fine and dandy and because everybody sees social media. You see
Yes.
everyone's highlight reel. And this is why I always say comparison is the thief of all joy because they watch the stuff I post, but they're not seeing the behind the scenes
Yeah.
of what it was like to get there. A lot of times, unless you're open about it, and I
Yep.
wasn't open about it
Mm.
at all in not at all. I'm more open about it now, like when I talk to people, but before, even when I was pregnant with Breck, I was constantly just Googling things and messaging people in moms groups and stuff like that instead of more like anonymously too on social media
Mm,
groups than I was like, I need to make an appointment and talk to somebody because it's still taboo. I know
yeah.
other people go through it, but even my husband would say during all of this, from start to finish, he would say, I 100% support you if you want to go talk to somebody. And here I am, like trying to internally do this, like anonymous member, blah, 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 asking questions in moms groups and stuff like that. So, but yeah, so part of that was really hard, but nothing really tested our marriage most until we had babies. And I always thought up until getting pregnant, nothing tested our marriage most until trying to get pregnant. But it was after the fact.
Oh man.
Nothing has tested our marriage more. And everybody doesn't see the middle of the night arguments or the crying or it's, and honestly, like looking back at it now, when you're in the fog of things,
Yeah.
it is very hard to see or take a step back and look at your own behaviors and other people's behaviors. And you're trying to be respectful. But I am not going to lie when I say after I had a baby and my hormones were crazy and I was like
Mhm.
so mean. And it's not something that I even saw during it. Because I've never really just gone out of my way to be a mean human being.
You're
Um,
not a mean human being.
so,
There's
but I can
normally
tell
not a
you,
mean bone
yes,
in your body.
it's not something that's in my nature to do, but
No.
something postpartum is so different. I became a mean person.
Mm,
And honestly, that lasted a long time. It wasn't just, oh, I was just mean for a month or two
mm,
during the like postpartum stages after having a baby. It was like I was a mean human for
mm.
a long time. Probably I would say at least I didn't even get okay with myself for at least the first year after I had Breck.
And what
Like
do you mean by mean? What type of, would you explain what type of thing
I
do?
would snap at my husband. I would like honestly, it's he's here just to help me. And like I said, he was a saint. Like even going through postpartum, he'd always be like, "What can I get for you? How can I help with the baby?" And he was. I'm very fortunate because he's very hands-on. Like I'm talking, my husband changes equally as many diapers. He gets up equally as many times in the middle of the night, if not more. Actually, these days he gets up with my toddler more than I do, so I can sleep. And he's very supportive. But honestly, in that I don't even know what happened. It's like a switch happened in my brain and I just became mean, like a totally different person. Everything annoyed me. I
Mm.
had high anxiety about everything, especially with like breastfeeding. And that was like part of also the hardest journey of my life was breastfeeding.
That's another thing I don't think people talk
Oh,
about very much because the
it's so
people
hard.
who don't struggle with it, who love it, that's what you
It
hear.
comes natural,
Yeah, and you
and
think that's the way it's supposed to be.
and I always talk about this. That's part of also why I was having so much depression and anxiety was the breastfeeding.
Mm,
And I learned from the first time with Breck because in my head, I was never opposed to formula or anything like that. I actually had formula in our pantry
mhm,
before Breck was born in case breastfeeding didn't work out. And I did like an abundance of research on formula. So I actually had European formula shipped in and stuff like that. And I had it on hand in case breastfeeding just didn't work out because I've always heard it's so hard.
yeah,
Now, mind you, I never realized how hard it was until I went through it
yeah.
firsthand. And for something that's supposed to be so natural, it was the most unnatural thing I've ever had to go through. The pain, in breastfeeding, learning, because it's not just you can do it and make them eat. It's like your baby has to learn how to
Yeah.
do that motion and eat, even if it's natural, or how to latch. And I was so fortunate in the fact, again, my kids both had great latches, but learning from Breck, like just how raw everything was and
Mm,
painful and bleeding. I was like, oh my God, this is not how this is supposed to go. And then to know that you have to feed your baby and you have that stress as a new mom, like this is all that they eat. Like that's
yeah.
all they eat for the first like 4 to 6 months is milk. Like I
Yeah.
have to feed my baby. Is it enough quantity? Because you can't see when you're breastfeeding. And when it's early on in those stages where you get colostrum and you're not even really producing real like white milk, you that liquid gold stuff, the transitional stuff, like you don't even know how much your baby's getting if they're on the boob. You don't. And I was stressed all the time because you're waking up every 2 hours to feed this kid. And I know every mom that's been a mom knows this feeling. And so I know it's nothing new. I'm not the only person going through it, but man, I was on like feeding like support groups and
Mm.
everything. And it was insane because that took one of the largest tolls in my postpartum journey was actually breastfeeding. And then because of how stressed I was and getting like, I was like setting a timer to wake up every few hours to make sure that I can keep my supply up and then feed the
Mhm.
baby or at least try. And I can tell you that actually was a big toll of my entire like anxiety and depression era of like
Yeah.
postpartum because and what's really crazy about all that is people talk about you have crazy thoughts in your head when you're going through postpartum. I don't know what it is. When you first have a baby, everything makes you cry. Your hormones are so crazy. You're so happy you're crying. Oh my gosh, you're eating a sandwich. It's so good. I'm crying. Makes you sob. You look at this baby, makes you cry. You look at your husband, that makes you cry. Oh, the weather outside is not how I want it. That makes me cry. Everything for a while there for the first month was insane. Then trying to learn how to breastfeed. And that was so stressful because that was something I think one of the reasons I also became mean was because if I look back on it now, is my husband was so supportive, yet for me internally, I he couldn't help me do any of these
Yeah.
things. Is he couldn't. He just couldn't help me do anything but be there for me to help the baby, like, change the baby or bounce the baby and rock him. Because when babies are colicky and you're up through the night and there's nothing makes them happy. There's points where like
Mhm.
you've done everything in your power and before you have something like shaking baby syndrome, you have to put them down and walk out of the room or something
Yeah.
like my husband was a godsend in that he would always take the baby and try to, you know, shush it or care for our kid. And here I am. And I think one of the reasons I got so crazy and mean is you almost become like resentful to the person that you're like,
Mhm.
why can't you do this for me? Like, why do I have to go through all
Yeah.
of it? It's like not his fault.
Sure.
And so part of it is I'm annoyed that I'm the one going through all of this, especially postpartum recovery. I had
Mhm.
a really hard recovery with Breck. Even 3 weeks post having a baby, my husband was still holding me and like helping me around the house. And mind you, every pregnancy and delivery is different because with my
Yeah.
second, it wasn't like that at all. I
Mhm.
had my son, and the next day after I was discharged from the hospital, I took my kids and I just went to Costco by myself. Like and did like a Costco haul. But with Breck, I was still like 3 to 4 weeks in and I was broken still.
Mm.
Everything hurt. Literally, like I said, bleeding nipples and everything's healing down there from having a baby. Everything was just I felt physical pain, emotional pain, like everything. I think that all plays a role
Yeah.
in all of this. And I do always say that a woman's body is really incredible because like you got to make the baby, you got to have the baby, and you got to feed the baby.
Yeah.
It's it's pretty miraculous what your body
Yeah.
can do. And when you look back at it, you're like, wow, I survived it.
Mm.
I can't believe I did that.
Yeah.
And I look back at it now and I say to myself, kudos, you did that. When you're in the fog of things, you
Yeah.
can't see it that way at all because more so you're like trying to latch and trying to teach the baby how to, you're like shoving their head in your breast and you're like, just do it right. So, and you're like cringing because you're like in so much pain
Mm.
and you're like, why me? Why me? During
Yeah.
that
Why did
time.
I
And
do this?
right. And as much as I loved our baby, there was like then you have crazy thoughts because your hormones are crazy. And
Yeah.
I know people know what I'm talking about when I say I would be holding my child, walking upstairs in the hallway, and then I'll be like, what if I threw my baby down the stairs? Like you get crazy like mental things happening in your brain. And I literally had to take a, like, I remember I took a step back away from the staircase and I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, I
Mhm.
remember thinking that in my head, like, what is wrong up here? Because I have never in my mind had thoughts of that. Or that's why postpartum depression is such a scary thing, like those baby blues, because you'll have thoughts of like other people I know. Like, I luckily didn't have this, but like other people will have thoughts of suicide, stuff that you never encountered in your lifetime. And
Mm.
you're like, why am I even having these thoughts in my head?
Yeah.
And like I said, I didn't get to that point, but I could totally easily see how someone can get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's that aspect of things. And that roller coaster, like you said, even after pregnancy was insane. Just that whole first year, because your baby changes most in their first 12 months of life than they will the rest of the time because the growth slows down after that. But it's insane, like how much the only constant thing in the first 12 months of life is change. And so
Mhm.
not only are you adapting to it, but like you have to adapt as your baby is growing. And so there's just something new like every week to 2 weeks as your
Yeah.
baby is growing. And so like who takes care of mom? Like that's what I used to think too. I
Yeah.
think part of the reason that like I was fighting with my husband, and I know this for a fact when I was crazy, I was like picking fights with my husband. And that is not in my nature to just pick fights or just randomly be mean just to be mean. That is not in my nature to do that. And even my husband will tell you, like, if we talk back about the first time after I had Breck, he'd be like, "You were so mean." And
Mm.
I will look back at it now and be like, "You were right." Because now I'm in a better mental state now than I was
Sure.
back then. But again, hindsight is 2020.
Hmm.
And my husband will say, "You were so mean." Like,
Mm.
and I would literally just shut up and do my best to be supportive because I knew you were going through a really hard time. And I think moms, like everything we have to deal with, like physically and mentally and emotionally, stuff like with my second, luckily, I knew the signs from the first time. So I did everything in my power to not get so far
Mm.
into it as I did the first time because with my son, when I was pregnant with my son, and mind you, Breck was only supposed to be an only child.
Oh.
And yeah, so not that he was an oopsie or anything because he was planned. It's just that with how hard my pregnancy and postpartum was, uh,
Yeah.
that's why Breck got her names. It's like she has her middle names are like family names and things like that was because my husband and I were just like, I think this is it.
Yeah.
Like with how hard it was for me. And like he couldn't do anything to help me
Yeah.
except do things behind the scenes, like around the house and things like that. He was so helpful, like doing chores and cooking and whatever. But he couldn't do anything for me for recovery and my mental state because that's something I have to like work on. And also with breastfeeding, he couldn't help me with any of that either. So I know for a fact that in some part he probably felt guilty in the fact that he couldn't help more.
Oh, for sure. Just with our IVF stuff, Colin, he says the hardest thing is watching me go through all of the stuff.
You went through all of it.
Yeah.
And he's just on the sidelines, like cheering you on, like, you got this.
Because he can only do so much. Yeah.
He did his part. And
Yeah.
then it's on you. And I think that's
Yeah.
also, like I told you, was like, I was like, why is it me? And that's the
Yeah.
mentality I went through. And I always knew after what I went through with Breck, when we did decide to have Remy, there was like hard boundaries that I had put. Even with Breck, I had formula, but I was like so adamant that I was going to breastfeed and I was going
Mhm.
to make it work. And granted, I was successful. I breastfed her for her whole first year of life, and I
Oh,
had left
wow.
over in the freezer to get her through some more. And I was so successful, but I that took such a toll because there was a point I remember after I went back to work and I'm pumping and I have to pump every 3 to 4 hours. And then, later on it gets your time gets spaced out more. So you're pumping every 5 to 6 hours instead of every 2 to 3 in the beginning. It's just like you're just trying to keep your volume up. And
Yeah.
so it's all supply and demand. And I remember like having to stop work at every given point in time to go run to that nursing room to go pump. And it was such an inconvenience to my day because here I am, I'm trying to get stuff done at work. And then, you only have so much time at work to get what you need to get done. And
Yeah.
that, and then I need to stop what I'm doing, rush over to go pump. And then here I am sitting in a room for 30 minutes, hooked to a machine, staring at a wall. And my work was really nice that like I asked for a laptop in there too, so I would cover up the camera and I could even do like meetings or something because like it would
Oh, yeah.
always fall like in the most inconvenient time if I'm like pumping or whatever, but I to stay productive. And so they were really supportive in helping me achieve those things. It was so hard for me, like even at home. If I wasn't breastfeeding, I would be pumping. I would have to stop what I was doing to go pump, or we're driving to Breckenridge to go on a vacation. And I had and part of my postpartum journey is I was trying to get in shape quick because I've always been in shape. So for me to be
Yeah.
as pregnant as I was, because that's all your endorphins of working out, that's how I get my happy is
Mhm.
active and hiking and running and doing all these active things. And for me to not have been able to do those things while I was pregnant was really taking a toll on my own
Yeah.
mental health as well. And so I knew when I had Breck, I wanted to become a fit parent or go back to at least my body looking the way that it did.
Yeah.
And so, and the hardest part and the realization was that I had to really swallow this was I couldn't do those things as quick as I wanted to. And I
Mm.
really had to take a step back. And it took a long time. And during it, I couldn't really see it. But afterward, I had to really say to myself, like, you got to give yourself grace. You got to give yourself grace. Like, it's okay. You didn't work out 3 times this week. It's okay. Or I think the hardest part for me was because I was so broken anatomy wise, I couldn't work out for the first 2.5 months at all. Like I could barely go and walk the trail for a
Mm.
mile. Not because I couldn't walk a mile, but really because like my body was just in so much pain, recovering still. So like that was also hurtful for me, myself, to myself, because I couldn't bounce back like quick. Like
Yeah.
none of that. And my again, I had these expectations in my head that that's like what I would be like because I've always been in shape. So that
Yeah.
kind of also took a huge toll. And with my son, when we were pregnant with him, I had talked to my husband that there was going to be strict boundaries with if it doesn't work out and my mental health, because breastfeeding really was a big toll. If it didn't work out or it does work out and I am over it with pumping or stuck to a machine 6 times a day. Like with my daughter, I remember I was trying to get in shape because it was snowboarding season. And my one love in my life, physical, like outdoor activity besides like hiking, is I love to snowboard. That's one of my things that I love to do personally or go out to the mountains. And I was like avidly working so hard so I can go on a ski trip. And my husband was so supportive. Like my husband was watching Breck and she was only a few months old. So I could go and be on the slopes with my friends for one day.
Yeah.
Made it happen. Like we went on a trip to the ski resort and booked a hotel, and my friends came out, and my husband stayed back, and he was like, "No, this is for you." He was so
Mm.
supportive. He's like, "This is for you. This is something that you enjoy, that you love, that you miss. I want this to be about something that you want to do today." And he was back in the hotel, watched Breck for me like the whole day. And but it was different because I was breastfeeding. So I'd go and do 3 hours with my friends and I would have to go back into the bathroom and sit in the bathroom and be pumping.
Mm.
Like at the
All your
ski resort.
snow gear on.
So hard. I'm like trying to take everything off. And
Yeah.
I'm like pumping in the bathroom on a bench and then putting my milk in like a cooler or something. And then we can
Yeah.
go snowboard for a few more hours. But life is just different. And
Yeah.
I know I'm not saying having kids is obviously an inconvenience, but my whole life got flipped upside down because
Sure.
it's not about you. It's
Yeah.
about the little humans now that you have
Yeah.
to take care of. And so that was also an additional factor to my postpartum journey was because what about mom? But because I had to put myself on the back burner because I'm always like, what I need to make sure Breck is taken care of
Yeah.
all the time. And so with my son, I had told my husband, if my mental health starts to decline again, how it did towards the 6 to 12 month era of me pumping for Breck and breastfeeding Breck. And mind you, it was such a negative and a positive. It was such a double-edged sword with breastfeeding because
Sure.
I told my husband, like with Remy, my son, at 6 months, I'm going to reassess. And if this is still something that I'm struggling with, I'm going to stop. And
Mm.
that like a personal decision if I'm going to reassess at this time. And if I make it then and I feel okay, then I'm going to keep going. But if I'm not, I'm pulling the plug.
Yeah.
And luckily, I was in so much better mental state postpartum with Remy. And I think it's like I said, I learned from the first time
Yeah.
where I didn't want to be,
Yeah.
um, that I was just overall happier after
Yeah.
having a baby, although still crazy.
Sure, because you're still dealing with the hormones and the
Right.
physical aspect of it and everything. But I think
Crazy.
also maybe knowing what to expect in general
Yes,
probably
and
helped a
stopping
lot.
it, like when you started feeling those emotions again, starting to get to you, like even just being like, husband, you need to watch the kids. I'm gonna
Yeah.
go out with my girlfriends for a night. Like I needed those kind of breaks. Whereas like with Breck, I didn't even go out. I didn't even. It was and also it was 2021, so I was still really scared about people coming over if they had COVID, like with a newborn, and I was like, it was it was so stressful that I think that also took a toll too.
Yeah, for sure. At what point after your first one? Was there any point in that time frame, you said it was about a year that you were affected by the depression, anxiety stuff. So where in there did you ever recognize that's what that was in that time frame?
After that. It was
It was
after that. It wasn't even
after.
during it. Yes. And
Okay.
so, like I said, I have no problems. I'm an advocate for mental health that I want people to seek help. And when I was going through it myself, I was just like, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Like I was trying to just take that mental load myself. And I didn't even realize that's what I was doing. I was like pushing people away,
Mm,
becoming more of a hermit
mhm.
because I was trying to deal with it on my own. And it wasn't even till Breck was like a year and a half, I look back at it and I'm like, I really should have done this or I
Oh,
should have done that. And my fog mostly, I feel like most of that all cleared after I was completely done breastfeeding. It's literally
interesting.
the hormonal change is insane because you get a hormonal change like when you have a baby, when you start breastfeeding, a few months after your baby has been breastfeeding because their needs are different.
Yeah.
Then they start solids, and then you have to get to a whole nother routine. And then, honestly, a lot of what I went through was because I feel like of breastfeeding.
Mm,
And so, like around 6 to 7 months, your body changes again to the needs of your baby. And then when they're weaning, and remember, I told you about the physical aspects of it.
yeah.
I had crazy postpartum hair loss. So common. This is so
Yeah.
common. So, like, for anybody who doesn't know, it could happen to you.
Yeah. It's any hormone changes affect your
Right.
hair
Even if
dramatically.
you lose a ton of weight fast, like
Yep.
just normally, like you can lose your hair. And
Yep.
mind you, I did lose a ton of weight quickly because I was trying to be proactive in like getting back to my old body
Yeah.
and breastfeeding is extra calories. I was dropping weight very quickly. And I know that also attributed, like, was a
Yep.
fact that was attributing to this. But my hair, I think it was 3 or 4 months with Breck, I was in the shower and I already knew my hair was like falling out. And but it was like cancer patient. Like it was just
Mhm.
so much. I would have a sink full
Yeah.
of just hair every shower that I took, and my ponytail was
Yeah.
like teeny. And so I also then started getting really stressed about my appearance.
Mhm.
And like hairline was like going up there. And then I can literally physically, if you had lifted my hair, you can see how sparse that you can see my scalp.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I get very self-conscious about stuff like that because in my whole life I've never had that.
Yeah.
And I know like right now we're through like YouTube and you do the recording through your channel and stuff, but like you can't see it too much now, but like I actually have an entire 5 inches on the bottom from just when I stopped breastfeeding Remy. Like I
Yeah.
had 2 sets of hair loss. Was like once when I was
Yeah.
like 3 to 4 months postpartum, just because your hormones are drastically changing, and then your weight's like going down. And then when I weaned with both my children, and this actually happened with both 3 to 4 months, and then at like around the 12 month mark, or when I weaned, because I actually weaned Remy earlier than Breck because I said, I'm done. Like
Mhm.
I had to take a step back and be like, not because I don't love my son,
Sure.
you know, I've made it. Like
Yeah.
I'm happy with the progression I've had. And I feel like it was a success to get to as far as I did with my
Yeah.
son. And when I stopped breastfeeding with him and weaned, again, crazy hair loss immediately.
Mm.
And so I have a weird 5 inch gap right now in the
Yep.
back that I have to pin up all the time and all of that. But you're right, I didn't see any of this till after the fact with Breck.
Mhm.
So she was about 14 to 16 months. And I
Mm.
remember just being like, I wish I wasn't so anxious when
Mm.
I first had you because I feel like I would have enjoyed motherhood
Yeah.
more because I feel like some of that was stripped away. Because, like I said, breastfeeding was a positive and a negative because although so difficult and something my husband couldn't help me with, that was one of the biggest bonding times that I
Yeah.
have with my children that my husband will never have.
Yeah.
It's double-edged sword. Like if I think about it,
Mhm.
I can already start like my eyes start getting like welly and with tears, and it was such a hard time that first year. And I would never have even known if I didn't take a step back, listen to podcasts about the postpartum. That was actually one of the biggest ways I got through rethinking through some of the things I went through was podcasts.
Mm.
And it's not even generally listening to podcasts only about postpartum either. It was like podcasts like yours where it was like going through a hard time and like looking back at like in that time what could I have done differently, but also what could, or in the situation, like what could I have done to also prevent myself from getting into
Mhm.
that dark rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate the second time around because I was so cognizant from the first time that I was trying to be more conscious
Yeah.
about actions. But don't get me wrong, even after I had my second, there was a time where I was still mean to my husband.
I think also you have so much, only so much control over that, right? Because again, it's the hormones, it's a
Um,
whole bunch of factors in there. But I think probably being aware of it helped a lot.
yeah, and don't get me wrong, my like I said, nothing tested our marriage most
Yeah.
than having a baby. And everyone's, what? That's crazy because that's when your life is starting and everything should be rainbows and butterflies. And that is not the case. Trying to keep this little human alive makes more arguments than you'll
Yeah.
ever know.
So when you were in it with the first one, is there anything that you think would have pulled you out of it sooner? Or was there really nothing you could do because you didn't
You
even
mean like
realize it?
mentally getting
Yeah,
out of it?
like I'm just thinking if somebody, because I think if you don't know, you didn't know going into it the first time, you knew more going into it the second time. So the awareness of it helped you mitigate however you could the second time. But is there I mean, you said it was also foggy through that whole first time and you didn't even realize it till later looking back. So is there anything like could somebody have said something to you? I'm just thinking for people who are listening, who are about to have their first baby or thinking about it or don't know anything about any of this stuff. What can you do? Or is there anything you can do? Maybe you can't except just go through it.
And honestly, I think the answer would be difficult because with postpartum, it's not one size fits all.
Sure.
And no one's journey is one size fits all. And I think the hardest part is what I went through may not be what somebody else goes through. So for
Yeah.
me personally, I'm already lucky I have the village that I do. I
Mhm.
have so many people that are willing to be hands-on with our children and help out, and friends that are also willing to help out, and a husband that's incredibly supportive. Instead of the way I grew up, my husband's incredibly hands-on father. And I think one of the things is if I'm not okay, looking back at it, I need to be okay with talking about it.
Mm,
Number one. And I am not that person. My husband can tell you firsthand that I am a person that I will get through it myself and I will figure it out
yeah.
and it will be
But you were
fine.
also figuring everything out by
That
yourself,
that was the
right?
problem. I was trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out my everything 24 hours a day. And that was also hard because I knew nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Most people don't going into their first one. So I
Yes.
just wondered if a friend would have come to you and said, "Hey, Cookie, I think you're struggling with postpartum."
Yeah.
Like, how would you have received that though? In the moment, you said you were
I,
mean. Maybe
to
you
be
would have
completely
been
honest,
mean.
I don't know. I would have even taken that well.
That's why I'm
And
wondering if maybe there was nothing that could have helped that first time around because you weren't even aware of it.
and also too, in my culture, it's always just you don't always ask for help or like things like that. So it's I honestly thought even if somebody did that and reached out, but I don't even know if they would have seen it because the front that I would give off in front of people
Ah.
would be so
Mhm.
different that they wouldn't even know what I'm going through mentally.
So it really was only your husband that was
Not really.
into
The
it.
person was
And
that's closest to me was the person that was getting the whiplash the most.
and so
Yeah.
definitely if he would have said anything, you probably would have been like, stop
Mhm.
it.
Right. And like I said, he was so supportive in the fact that there was points in that 12 months where he was like, I remember him holding my hand and just being like in the car, if you need to talk to somebody, I support it.
Mm,
But he was also probably felt, I'm sure he probably felt like he was walking on glass, even
yeah,
like saying that statement, because
yeah,
you never know any little thing that you could have said at that time would have probably had me have a breakdown and start
yeah,
crying. And it could have been something like, as in, you're such a great mother to, you're like, you're doing fantastic to even just, babe, I think you need to see somebody would literally just everything would make
mhm,
me, I was so unstable
yeah,
at that time. But like I said, even if I wasn't internally okay myself, I would do my best to always put my best face forward in
yeah,
front of everybody else. But I
yeah.
think,
That's true, right? So this is all going on behind closed doors.
and the biggest takeaway too is if I had to give anybody advice is if it is so normal that um anxiety and depression and stuff like this, postpartum anxiety especially, is super normal. And I already had anxiety to start
Mhm.
with. Like, if you're already an anxious person, just know like it's going to be elevated
Mm.
going through it your first time, because everything is unknown. 24
Mm.
hours a day, everything is unknown with the newborn. And there was a couple times I did reach out to UC Health to, I think it was the Wish Clinic. It's like a women's integrated health. They also have another offshoot where it's like postpartum, and it's like mental health
Okay.
facility that kind of, it's all mental health related, with also normal like health, like OBGYN and stuff, because they
Okay.
want to make sure moms are okay
Yeah.
overall, like
Yeah.
umbrella,
Yeah.
just like physically. And I did talk to a couple people during this time too on the phone. And once was before I had a baby, because they're like, I need to know, talk to me on why you think you're, talk to me why you're so anxious. And I was so scared to give birth before
Oh.
having a baby. So I talked to a person the entire time for like an hour, and they're like, your fears are not like, they're not illegitimate or anything. Like, they're valid on why you feel the way that you do. And then the second person I talked to was, I was in the car and I was just like talking to them through Bluetooth for like an hour, and I was just like talking to them about how anxious I was. And it was all normal things on why women feel the way they do postpartum. It's
Yeah.
now just a more of how you're going to
Yeah.
manage that. And I feel like I've gotten better. I'm not still 100%. I guarantee, for being an anxious person, I'm not to my level that I was prior to having babies.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I think I always have some height of anxiety. And I'm not going to lie when I say this, like when I was in the fog, I wouldn't have known this, but I wouldn't even put it past it. If I look back now, some anti-anxiety medication would have probably been good for me.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
looking back at it now, and I would have, looking then, I would have been like, no, no way. But then now, outside of it, I really think
Mhm.
back and I'm like, maybe that
Yeah.
wasn't such a bad idea. Even if it was temporary or something, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
because sometimes I felt like my heart was racing so hard that it was going to burst,
Oh.
anxiety. And sometimes, there was one time too, I had so much anxiety, I put Breck on a baby carrier and I walked the trails for
Mm.
God how long, and I walked and I cried the entire time. Like,
Oh.
I was like, it was like over an hour of just walking and crying with baby wearing. And
Mm.
sometimes you just need a good cry.
Yes. I'm a huge advocate for crying. I know there's a
Like,
lot of people that hold it in, but I
but
cry about
sometimes,
everything in
yeah.
general. I
And
cry about all the emotions I have. So,
there was once my husband was on a business trip, and I had Breck by myself while I was on maternity leave, and it was just so much all day, every day, that I remember going into our master bedroom closet, and I was like crying in the closet. And then I was like, I came out and I was like, all right, I'm fine now.
yeah.
Like, I just had to take a break.
I mean, I even feel like if I haven't cried in a while,
You're
then
for like
it
a good
creeps up on me.
cry. Like,
Yeah, all of a sudden I'm like, I think I need a cry day. I don't even know why. No one's bothering, nobody's doing anything, and there's no
mm.
specific reason. I just need to cry.
And I and the funniest part is, now, after having two kids, my body is so different in the fact that, like, how my body handles periods and the cycle
Mm.
is 100% different than before I had kids. Like, I had never had a cramp in my life
Oh, you're lucky.
until I was in labor with my child. And then now, with having both kids, the stuff that your body goes through,
Yeah.
I get angry every month because when you have that visitor, I am taking like Tylenol and Advil and
Yeah.
Aleve, and I am just like dying. And
Yeah.
it's something that now I just have accepted at this point. After having kids, that's just must be how it is for me. But
Yeah.
maybe it's different for somebody else. And when, like you said before, um, would you have even known, about it when you're in the fog? But I think one of the hardest parts, and like I said, this is a little still taboo, even if people talk about it, they don't really talk about it sometimes,
Yeah.
that the societal expectation
Mm.
that you see, please don't compare yourself. If I had to give any advice to anybody, is don't compare yourself to anybody that's like an Instagram influencer or like a Facebook or whatever social media outlet there is, because it's like you're just seeing their fabulous life with newborns, and that's just not how it is in real life sometimes. I had amazing times with my daughter, and I wouldn't take any of it back.
Sure.
That mother saying that I would do it all over again.
Hmm.
Yeah. I feel crazier to say that because
But maybe do it all over again with the knowledge
right.
you have now.
Right. So I feel like I'm a little bit psychotic when I say stuff like that
No.
because that's a mother's intuition is you go through all this and you love your children so much and then after everything you've been through, you will still say, I would have done that all over again to meet
Yeah.
you. And so it's I feel crazy. I mean,
I think we're also biologically programmed to think that way because we're supposed to forget how difficult those times are so that
right.
we keep doing it, right?
But
So
my
we
biggest
keep
advice, yeah,
procreating.
yeah, and my
That's
biggest
just,
advice to anybody is just do not compare yourself to somebody's influencers, like highlight reel about newborns and how magical everything is. And the days that you have that are tough, it's okay.
yeah.
We've all been there. And if you need someone to talk to, I will happily open up a conversation with anybody if
Mm,
you need someone to talk to. Because the societal expectation is that like new moms, they bounce back, you get your body back, you're providing for this kid and you're happy go lucky and life is perfectly fine. But
yeah.
it is a lot to juggle. And especially when you start back at work and you have your normal life, you have babies, and you still have pressures from your job because you're career driven. It's okay to feel like that.
Mm,
And if you feel overly anxious than normal, or definitely, I even encourage people to go talk to somebody now, just like my husband did for
yeah.
me. Go talk to somebody. It's okay.
Yeah.
And like I said, looking back at it, maybe some anti-anxiety medication back at the time, back then when I had my daughter, would have done me some good, but I wouldn't have seen that until now.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to be like super healthy and everything that you take, the baby takes. So you're trying to be whole and everything that you're eating and no drinking and stuff. I was really hesitant to
Yeah.
even think about stuff like that. But honestly, hindsight is 2020. It would have
Yeah.
probably done me some good.
Yeah. Oh,
Mhm. And learning coping mechanisms too. Like if you do talk to somebody, I think it's really important that you, for whatever you're going through. So if you're a high anxious person going through and learning what your triggers are and how you can deal with it during that time. Or if you already had maybe before pregnancy, because I know this is a big thing. Some people already have depression or have been on like
yeah.
antidepressant medication. You're going to feel even crazier with all your hormonal changes. Don't think that's not abnormal.
Yeah.
Normal that when you go through that. I can't only imagine like luckily I told you before, I didn't have that prior to.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine if I already had, let's say I was already on like antidepressant medication. I can imagine how that would be postpartum.
Yeah. Yeah, because everything's heightened, right? Even your senses
Yeah.
are heightened, like your smell, taste,
Mhm.
everything. So, of course, it makes sense that your emotions would be heightened as well. And then the hormones, again, are just
Yeah.
affecting all of it and controlling all of it.
And
So,
I'm not saying that I don't want people to come and be like, "Oh, poor you." Like
no.
none of that. Like we're strong women. We will get through it. And it's just a matter of sometimes it's what about mom? Like you have to think
Yeah.
about that. What about mom? And yes, like I said, your husbands are great. They do a good job and they're very supportive, but like your husband can only do so much for you at the
Yeah.
time. And
Yeah.
it's funny because I always joke going through newborn stage and having a like delivery, recovery, and going through your first year of life with your firstborn, really, because you've learned things after that.
Yeah.
It's almost like an initiation to motherhood.
Mm,
It sucks to say it that way. It's like the only way to get through it is to go through it.
sure.
But you really need to have a good support system beforehand.
Mm,
I luckily did, but like I said, I didn't really show it in front of people that I was
yeah.
going through such a hard time.
Oh.
So that's all I got. I don't.
No, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think it's really important. And I hope that everybody listening, if there's anybody that's struggling with it or has struggled with it, I hope they feel a little less alone now or aware that maybe they did, there's people that still aren't even aware that they went through something like that. So thank you so much for coming on here and sharing all of that.
Absolutely. I enjoyed talking to you. Always.
Yeah. Yeah. And if anybody wants to get a hold of Cookie, if somebody is struggling, you said you'd be happy to open a conversation
Yeah.
there. I will link ways to get a hold of her in the show notes. But yeah, do you have any final parting words?
No, definitely have your tribe and it's okay to ask for help.
Mm. And don't compare
And,
yourself.
and don't compare yourself to others and have grace.
Mhm.
It's the hardest thing you'll go through, but the most rewarding thing on
Yeah.
the other end of things
Mm.
to go through. There's the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Cookie. I love chatting with you. This was so good. So,
Perfect.
thanks for coming on again. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the stories shared, please consider following us on your preferred podcast platform. Your ratings and reviews make a huge difference. They help us reach more listeners and continue bringing you engaging, insightful content. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Until next time, keep listening, growing, and sharing.